This 4-year-old beggar girl finds the wheelchair-bound son of a millionaire drowning in the pool. The boy was almost losing his breath, but she did something no one expected. Comment what you think is going to happen. Your support is very important. The scorching September sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked pavement of Riverside, Tennessee, a small town where everyone knew everyone's business. 4-year-old Iris crouched behind a rusty dumpster near the town square, her tiny fingers clutching a piece of stale bread she'd found discarded outside Miller's bakery. Her curly hair, once golden and bouncy, now hung in matted tangles around her dirt-streaked face. The pink dress she wore, the same one for 2 months now, was torn at the hem and stained with mud. 2 months. That's how long it had been, since Grandma Rose simply didn't wake up one morning, leaving Iris alone in their cramped trailer on the outskirts of town. At 4 years old, she didn't understand words like heart attack or social services, but she understood enough to know that the strange men in suits who came asking questions meant trouble. So she ran, her small legs carrying her away from the only home she'd ever known. Now, survival meant knowing which storekeepers might spare a day-old donut, which park benches offered the softest spots to sleep, and which shadows provided the best hiding places when the police car made its evening rounds. Iris had developed an uncanny ability to read people's faces, the quick dart of eyes that meant keep walking, the slight softening around the mouth that suggested kindness. On this particular morning, her stomach growled with such ferocity that she decided to venture beyond her usual territory. The wealthy side of Riverside beckoned with its manicured lawns and the promise of better garbage. She made her way toward Magnolia Heights, where the houses grew larger and the fences taller with each block. The Vasconcellos mansion stood like a fortress at the end of Elm Street, its white columns gleaming against the red brick facade. Iris had heard whispers about the man who lived there, Leandro Vasconcellos, owner of the biggest furniture factory in 3 counties. People spoke of him in hushed tones, some with admiration, others with the kind of wariness reserved for those who wielded power. She'd been drawn to the property before, not by the grandeur, but by the untouched garbage bins that sat near the service entrance. Rich people, she'd learned, threw away perfectly good food. As she approached the wrought-iron fence, the sound of splashing water caught her attention. Through the ornate bars, she glimpsed a pristine pool reflecting the morning light. Then she heard it, a desperate thrashing sound followed by panicked shouting. "Help! Someone help me!" The voice was young, scared, and fading fast. Iris pressed her face against the cool metal bars and saw him, a boy, probably much older than her, struggling in the deep end of the pool. His wheelchair sat empty at the pool's edge, its wheels still spinning slowly from where it had been abandoned in haste. Without a second thought, Iris began to climb. The fence was tall, its decorative spikes menacing, but fear for the drowning boy pushed her upward. Her small hands found purchase between the iron scrollwork, her bare feet seeking any groove or ledge that could support her weight. A spike caught her dress, tearing it further, but she didn't stop. She dropped into the manicured garden with a soft thud, her knees scraping against the decorative stones. The boy's head had disappeared beneath the surface, and only his arms remained visible, flailing weakly against the chlorinated water. Iris had never learned to swim properly. Grandma Rose had taken her to the community pool once, where she'd managed only to dog paddle a few feet before panic set in. But as she stood at the pool's edge, watching the boy's desperate struggle, swimming lessons seemed irrelevant. She jumped. The water hit her like a cold slap, filling her mouth and nose with its chemical taste. For a moment she sank, her wet dress dragging her down toward the pool's blue-tiled bottom. But then survival instinct kicked in, the same instinct that had kept her alive on the streets for 2 months. Her arms began moving in the clumsy strokes Grandma Rose had shown her, propelling her toward the flailing figure in the center of the pool. When she reached him, the boy's eyes were wide with terror and exhaustion. He was bigger than her, heavier, But desperation gave Iris strength she didn't know she possessed. She grabbed his shirt, using every ounce of energy to keep both their heads above water. "Don't give up," she gasped between mouthfuls of chlorinated water. "I've got you." The boy's name, she would later learn, was Kaio. He was 12 years old, and he hadn't been in water since the accident that changed everything 3 years ago. Today, he'd grown tired of sitting by the pool, watching the water that once brought him so much joy. In a moment of frustration and longing, he'd transferred himself from his wheelchair to the pool's edge, intending only to dangle his feet in the water. But his arms, weakened from months of limited mobility, had given out, sending him tumbling into the deep end, where his legs couldn't help him. For what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Iris held on to Kaio, her small body acting as a human life preserver. Her arms burned with the effort, and her lungs screamed for air each time a wave washed over her face. Just when she thought she couldn't hold on any longer, she heard heavy footsteps running across the pool deck. Holy God! Kaio! Strong hands plunged into the water, pulling first Kaio, then Iris, from the chlorinated depths. As she lay gasping on the warm concrete, water streaming from her matted hair, Iris looked up into the face of a man she'd only seen from a distance. Leandro Vasconcelos was bigger than she'd imagined, with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes that held a mixture of panic and profound gratitude. But it was what happened next that would change everything. As Leandro knelt beside his son, checking for injuries, Kaio's shaky hand reached out toward the small, bedraggled girl who had risked everything to save him. "Dad," Kaio whispered, his voice hoarse from pool water and fear. "She saved my life." Leandro stared at the small girl lying on his pool deck, her chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. Water dripped steadily from her tangled hair, forming small puddles on the expensive Italian tiles. Up close, she looked even younger than he'd initially thought. Fragile as a bird, with hollowed cheeks that spoke of too many missed meals and eyes too old for her face. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked gently, crouching down to her level while keeping one protective hand on Kaio's shoulder. "Iris," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle lapping of pool water against the filter system. "Iris, where are your parents? How did you get in here?" She sat up slowly, wincing as the movement pulled at her scraped knees. Her gaze darted nervously between Leandro and the fence she'd climbed, as if calculating her chances of escape. "I don't have parents," she said matter-of-factly. "I climbed over because he was drowning." The simplicity of her statement hit Leandro harder than any elaborate explanation could have. This child, this tiny, malnourished child, had scaled a 6-foot security fence and thrown herself into deep water to save his son, with no thought for her own safety or the consequences that might follow. "Where do you live?" he pressed gently. Iris's eyes dropped to her hands, which were folded tightly in her lap. "Around," she mumbled. Kaio, who had been listening to this exchange with growing interest, shifted on his towel. "Dad, look at her clothes," he said quietly. "And her hands, they're all scratched up." Leandro had noticed. The pink dress was more whole than fabric now, held together by stubborn seams and what looked like safety pins. Her small hands bore fresh cuts from climbing the fence, but also older marks, the kind that came from digging through garbage or sleeping on rough surfaces. "Iris," Leandro said carefully, "when was the last time you had a real meal?" She considered this question with the seriousness of someone much older. "Yesterday, Mrs. Patterson from the flower shop gave me half a sandwich, but I saved some for later." The casual mention of saving food, hoarding it like a survival mechanism, made Leandro's chest tighten. He'd lost his wife Mariana 3 years ago in a car accident that also left Kaio paralyzed from the waist down. In the aftermath of that tragedy, he'd thrown himself into work, building his furniture company into a regional empire while struggling to connect with his grieving son. But this was different. This was a child who'd known loss in ways that made his own struggles seem manageable. "Maria!" He called toward the house. His housekeeper appeared at the sliding glass doors, her face creased with concern. Maria Gonzalez had worked for the Vasconcelos family for 15 years, arriving as a young woman from El Salvador and becoming an integral part of their household. She'd helped Leandro navigate the early days of single parenthood after Mariana's death, and her maternal instincts were legendary. Dios mío, she breathed when she saw the scene by the pool. What happened here? This is Iris, Leandro explained. She saved Caio from drowning. Could you please run a warm bath and find some clean clothes? And maybe prepare something gentle for her to eat? Maria's expression shifted from concern to determination. She'd raised 4 children of her own back in San Salvador before coming to Tennessee, and she recognized a child in crisis when she saw one. Of course, Mr. Leandro. Come, pequeña, let's get you warm and dry. But Iris shrank back, pressing herself against Caio's wheelchair. I should go, she said, trying to stand on shaky legs. I don't want to cause trouble. You're not causing trouble, Caio said firmly, reaching down to touch her shoulder. You saved my life. That makes you family. The word family hung in the air like a promise neither man nor boy was quite ready to make, but couldn't take back either. Iris looked between them with eyes that had seen too much disappointment to easily trust such kindness. Just for tonight, Leandro found himself saying. You can stay just for tonight, and we'll figure everything out tomorrow. He meant it as a temporary solution, a chance to get the child cleaned up and fed before contacting the proper authorities. But as Maria gently coaxed Iris toward the house, chattering in soothing Spanish mixed with English, Leandro caught sight of something that made his breath hitch. Caio was smiling. Not the polite, practiced smile he'd worn like armor since the accident, but a genuine expression of interest and concern. His son hadn't shown real emotion toward another person in months, maybe years. Yet here he was, watching Iris disappear into the house with the same protective intensity Leandro recognized in himself. An hour later, the transformation was remarkable. Clean and dressed in one of Caio's old T-shirts that hung on her like a dress, Iris sat at the kitchen table, working her way through a bowl of Maria's homemade soup. Her hair, freed from dirt and tangles, fell in soft golden curls around her shoulders. She ate slowly, methodically, pausing between spoonfuls as if afraid the food might disappear. How old are you, Iris? Leandro asked, settling into the chair across from her. 4, she replied, then added with startling precision, but I'll be 5 in December. 4 years old. The reality of her situation hit him anew. She'd been surviving alone on the streets for 2 months at an age when most children were just learning to tie their shoes. Tell me about your grandmother, he said gently. Iris's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Grandma Rose was the best cook in the whole world, she said quietly. She made pancakes shaped like flowers, and she sang songs from when she was little, but then she went to sleep and wouldn't wake up, and the men in suits came, and I had to hide because they wanted to take me away. The story emerged in fragments over the next hour. Rose Patterson, apparently Mrs. Patterson from the flower shop was a relative, had raised Iris since infancy. The child's parents were never mentioned, either because she didn't know about them or because their absence was too painful to discuss. When Rose died, Iris had instinctively hidden from the social workers, somehow understanding that being found meant being separated from everything familiar. You've been living on the streets for 2 months? Caio asked, his voice tight with disbelief. Iris nodded matter-of-factly. I'm good at finding food and safe places to sleep, and I can tell which people might hurt me just by looking at their faces. The casual mention of this survival skill, a 4-year-old's ability to assess strangers for danger, left both father and son speechless. As the evening wore on, Iris seemed to relax incrementally. She answered their questions with startling honesty, described her daily routine with the pragmatism of someone twice her age, and showed genuine curiosity about Caio's wheelchair and the house's many rooms. But beneath her surface calm, Leandro could see the hypervigilance of someone always prepared to run. "Where will you go tomorrow?" Caio asked as Maria began clearing the dinner dishes. Iris shrugged. "Back to the square, probably. There's a good spot behind the library where the police don't usually look." "What if," Caio said slowly, glancing at his father, "what if you didn't have to go back? What if you could stay here?" Leandro felt his heart skip. The suggestion was impossible, of course. He was a single father, still struggling to care for his disabled son. Taking in a homeless child, especially one with no legal guardian, would involve courts and social workers and complications he wasn't prepared to handle. But looking at Iris's face, the way hope flickered in her eyes before caution stamped it out, he found himself saying, "We could talk about it. See what options there might be." That night, after Iris had fallen asleep in the guest room, the first real bed she'd slept in since her grandmother's death, Leandro sat in his study, staring at legal documents and phone numbers for family services. Every logical part of his mind said this was temporary, that tomorrow he'd make the necessary calls and return this child to the system designed to protect her. But down the hall, for the first time in 3 years, he could hear the sound of Caio talking animatedly to someone. Even through the walls, his son's laughter rang with a joy that had been absent since the accident. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Riverside, Tennessee, promising the kind of night where tough decisions got made and lives changed forever. The morning sun filtered through the guest room's lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across Iris's sleeping face. She lay curled in the center of the king-sized bed like a small island, her body taking up barely a quarter of the space. Even in sleep she remained tense, one hand clutched around the edge of the blanket as if ready to grab it and run at the first sign of danger. Leandro stood in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, watching this tiny stranger who had upended his carefully ordered world in less than 24 hours. Behind him, Caio maneuvered his wheelchair with practiced silence, joining his father in the doorway. "She's still here," Caio whispered, and the relief in his voice was unmistakable. "Did you think she'd leave?" "I thought maybe she'd think it was all a dream. Good things don't usually last for people like her, do they?" The wisdom in his 12-year-old son's observation struck Leandro hard. Since the accident, Caio had developed an understanding of loss and disappointment that seemed far beyond his years. Perhaps that's why he'd connected so quickly with Iris. They were both children who'd learned that happiness was fragile and often temporary. "Mr. Leandro?" Maria appeared at the end of the hallway, her voice carrying the cautious tone she used when she disagreed with his decisions, but was trying to be respectful. "I've prepared breakfast, but we need to discuss the situation with the little one." They retreated to the kitchen, where Maria had laid out a spread that could have fed a small army. Scrambled eggs, bacon, fresh biscuits, fruit salad, and pancakes cut into flower shapes that made Leandro's throat tighten as he remembered Iris's words about her grandmother. "You cannot keep her without proper documentation," Maria said bluntly, her maternal instincts warring with her practical nature. "The authorities will come looking eventually. That child needs official help, medical care, school enrollment, legal guardianship papers." "I know," Leandro admitted, settling heavily into his chair. "I'll make the calls this morning." "But Dad," Caio protested, wheeling himself to the table, "what if they put her in a bad place? What if they separate her from people who actually care about her?" It was a valid concern. Leandro's own childhood had been comfortable and stable, but his law school roommate had grown up in foster care and shared stories that still made Leandro's stomach clench decades later. The system was supposed to protect children, but it didn't always succeed. "I'll make sure she goes somewhere good," he promised, though privately he wondered how much influence he actually had over the process. The sound of small feet on hardwood flooring interrupted their conversation. Iris appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing Caio's oversized t-shirt, her golden curls mussed from sleep. She surveyed the elaborate breakfast spread with the same careful assessment she'd used to evaluate strangers on the street. "Is this all for me?" she asked uncertainly. "It's for all of us," Maria said warmly, pulling out a chair. "Come, pequeña. You need to eat well to grow strong." As Iris settled at the table and began working her way through the flower-shaped pancakes with reverent concentration, Leandro's phone buzzed with a text from his assistant, reminding him of the morning's board meeting. His furniture company, Vasconcelos Custom Designs, was in the middle of negotiations for their largest contract ever, a deal that would supply furniture for a chain of upscale hotels across the southeast. Missing this meeting wasn't an option. "I have to go to the office," he announced reluctantly, "but I'll be back this afternoon, and we'll figure everything out then." "Can Iris stay here?" Caio asked quickly. "Of course she can stay," Maria interjected before Leandro could answer. "I'll watch her." Iris looked up from her pancakes, syrup sticky around her mouth. "I don't want to be trouble." "I can go back to the square until you decide what to do with me." The casual way she discussed being disposed of made Leandro's chest ache. "You're not going anywhere," he said firmly. "You're staying right here, where it's safe." An hour later, Leandro sat in his office conference room, trying to focus on market projections and delivery schedules, but his mind kept drifting to the small girl who was probably exploring his house with wide-eyed curiosity. His assistant, Janet, had worked for him long enough to recognize when something was bothering him. "Everything all right, boss?" she asked during a break in the presentation. "You seem distracted." Leandro considered brushing off her concern, but Janet had been with the company since its early days, when he was building furniture in his garage while Mariana handled the books. She'd earned the right to straight answers. "There's a child staying at my house," he said carefully. "A little girl who saved Caio from drowning yesterday. She's homeless, and I'm trying to figure out how to help her." Janet raised an eyebrow. "Homeless? How old?" "4. "Jesus." Janet was quiet for a moment. "You know my sister works for Child Protective Services over in Nashville, right? I could make some calls, find out what the process looks like." "That would be helpful," Leandro admitted, though the thought of involving CPS made his stomach clench with anxiety. Meanwhile, back at the house, Iris was discovering what it felt like to be a normal child, even temporarily. Maria had introduced her to the concept of toys, Caio's old building blocks, coloring books, and a collection of picture books that had survived from before the accident. But what fascinated Iris most was Caio's art supplies. "You can really draw anything you want?" she asked, holding up a charcoal pencil like it was made of gold. "Anything?" Caio confirmed from his wheelchair, positioned beside her at the kitchen table. "Watch this." He sketched quickly, his hand moving with practiced confidence across the paper. In minutes, a recognizable portrait of Iris emerged. Her curly hair, her serious eyes, the small scar on her chin from some long-ago accident. "That's me," Iris breathed, touching the paper with reverent fingers. "It really looks like me." "Now you try," Caio said, sliding a fresh piece of paper toward her. What happened next surprised everyone. Iris picked up the charcoal and, without hesitation, began to draw. Her lines were less refined than Caio's, but there was something raw and powerful about the image that emerged, a bird in flight, its wings spread wide against storm clouds, carrying something precious in its talons. "That's beautiful," Maria said, looking over her shoulder. "What is the bird carrying?" Iris considered the question seriously. "Hope, I think. My grandma always said birds carry messages between the living and the people who went to sleep forever." The room fell quiet. Even Maria, who had seen plenty of hardship in her life, seemed moved by this 4-year-old's ability to transform trauma into art. "You're really good at this," Caio said softly. "I could teach you more techniques if you want." For the first time since her arrival, Iris smiled without reservation, a brilliant expression that transformed her entire face. "You would do that? Really?" "Really." They spent the next 2 hours drawing together, Iris creating image after image with startling speed and emotional depth. Birds featured prominently, but she also drew houses with warm light glowing in the windows, gardens full of flowers, and families gathered around dinner tables. Each sketch seemed to represent something she'd observed, but never experienced herself. It was during this peaceful interlude that everything changed. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock, its formal chime echoing through the house like a death knell. Maria went to answer it, returning moments later with 2 women in professional attire and grim expressions. "I'm Sarah Martinez from Child Protective Services," the taller woman announced, showing her badge. "We received a report about an unaccompanied minor on these premises." Iris went rigid, the charcoal pencil falling from her fingers to clatter onto the table. Her carefully constructed sense of safety crumbled in an instant, replaced by the hyper-vigilant fear that had kept her alive on the streets. "I need to run," she whispered to Kaio, her voice barely audible. "No," Kaio said firmly, reaching for her hand. "You don't have to run anymore." But even as he said the words, both children could see the truth in the social workers' faces. Whatever paradise Iris had found here was about to end, and there was nothing a 12-year-old boy could do to stop it. Sarah Martinez's trained eyes swept across the kitchen, taking in every detail. The art supplies scattered across the table, the half-eaten sandwich on Iris's plate, the way the small girl pressed herself against Kaio's wheelchair as if he could somehow shield her from what was coming. Her partner, Detective Linda Walsh, stood near the doorway with the practiced stance of someone prepared to block any escape attempts. "We need to speak with the homeowner," Sarah said, her voice professionally neutral. "Is Mr. Vasconcelos available?" "He's at work," Maria replied, her protective instincts flaring. "But he'll be home soon. The little one is safe here. She's been well cared for." "I'm sure she has," Sarah said diplomatically. "But housing an unaccompanied minor without proper documentation is a serious matter. We have protocols that must be followed." Iris had gone completely silent, her breathing shallow and rapid. The confident child who'd been creating art just moments before had vanished, replaced by the street-smart survivor who knew when adults started using words like protocols. Bad things followed. "What happens to her now?" Kaio asked, his knuckles white as he gripped his wheelchair's armrests. "She'll be placed in temporary care while we investigate her situation," Detective Walsh explained. "We'll need to verify her identity, locate any living relatives, and assess what placement options are available." "She doesn't have any relatives," Kaio said desperately. "Her grandmother died, and that's why she was living on the streets. You can't just take her away from the first safe place she's found." Sarah's expression softened slightly. She'd been doing this job for 8 years, long enough to recognize genuine concern when she saw it. "I understand this is difficult, but we have to follow proper procedures. The child needs medical evaluation, psychological assessment, and legal documentation of her status." "How long will that take?" Maria asked. "Could be days, could be weeks," Detective Walsh admitted. "Depends on what we find and how quickly we can process the paperwork." Iris finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can I take my drawings?" The simple question hit everyone like a physical blow. Here was a 4-year-old preparing to lose another home, another family, and she was asking about the pictures she'd created during her brief moment of happiness. "Of course, sweetheart," Sarah said gently, her professional composure cracking slightly. "You can take anything that belongs to you, but I don't have anything that belongs to me," Iris said matter-of-factly. "Everything I had was Grandma Rose's, and when she went to sleep forever, the men in suits took it all away." The adults exchanged glances. This child had been through more trauma in her 4 years than most people experienced in a lifetime, and now they were about to add another layer by removing her from the first stable situation she'd known in months. Kaio made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. "Then I'm giving you the art supplies," he announced, "and some of my books. They belong to you now, so you can take them wherever you go." "Caio, you don't have to—" Maria started. "Yes, I do," he interrupted. "Someone gave me hope when I thought I'd lost everything. Now I'm giving hope to someone else." While Maria helped Iris pack a small bag with the art supplies and a few of Caio's favorite children's books, Detective Walsh made a phone call to arrange temporary placement. The conversation was conducted in hushed tones, but the occasional phrases that drifted over emergency placement, limited options, overcrowded facilities painted a grim picture. "There's space at Riverside Group Home," she announced after hanging up. "It's not ideal, but it's clean and safe, and the staff is experienced with traumatized children." "A group home?" Caio's voice rose with alarm. "She's 4 years old. She needs a family, not an institution." "Sometimes institutions are the best we can do," Sarah said sadly. "The foster care system is overwhelmed, especially for children with complex needs." As they prepared to leave, Iris approached Caio's wheelchair one last time. Without a word, she handed him a drawing she'd been working on, a detailed sketch of the mansion with stick figures gathered around the pool area. In the picture, a small figure was reaching toward a larger one in the water, while other figures ran to help. "So you won't forget," she said simply. "I could never forget," Caio replied, his voice thick with emotion. "And this isn't goodbye forever. My dad will figure something out. He has to." But even as he said the words, doubt gnawed at him. His father was a good man, but he was also practical. Taking in a homeless child would complicate their lives in ways that might be too difficult to manage. 20 minutes later, Leandro burst through the front door to find Maria crying at the kitchen table, while Caio stared out the window at the empty driveway. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Gone," Caio said flatly. "Child services took her to some group home. They said you should have called them immediately, instead of letting her stay here." Leandro sank into a chair, the weight of his failure settling over him like a blanket. He'd spent the morning in meetings discussing profit margins and delivery schedules, while a 4-year-old girl who'd saved his son's life was being processed through a system that saw her as a case number rather than a person. "Did they say which facility?" "Riverside Group Home," Maria supplied through her tears. "Mr. Leandro, that child has been through so much. She was just starting to feel safe here." "I have to fix this," he said, reaching for his phone. "There has to be something I can do." But his lawyer's response was discouraging. "Emergency placement orders are hard to challenge," David Chen explained. "The state has broad authority when it comes to protecting children. Your best bet is to work within the system, apply for foster care certification, demonstrate that you can provide appropriate care." "How long does that process take?" "Months, minimum. Background checks, home studies, training requirements. It's not something that happens overnight." "Months?" Leandro's heart sank. "She's 4 years old, David. She's already been abandoned by everyone who was supposed to protect her." "I can't let her think I abandoned her, too." That evening, the Vasconcelos house felt hollow, despite having the same number of occupants as the night before. Caio barely touched his dinner, spending most of the meal staring at Iris's empty chair. The kitchen table, cleared of art supplies, looked stark and unwelcoming. "I keep thinking about her drawings," Caio said finally. "All those pictures of families and homes with warm lights in the windows. She was drawing things she wanted, but had never really had." "We'll get her back," Leandro said, trying to inject confidence he didn't feel into his voice. "You don't know that," Caio replied with painful honesty. "Good things don't always happen just because we want them to. I learned that when Mom died." The comparison hit Leandro like a slap. His son was right. They'd both learned that wanting something desperately didn't guarantee getting it. But this felt different. Iris wasn't gone because of some random accident or twist of fate. She was gone because of bureaucracy, because of systems and procedures that prioritize paperwork over people. "I'm going to see her tomorrow," he decided. Find out what she needs, what we can do to bring her home. Home, Caio repeated thoughtfully. Do you think she thinks of this place as home? Leandro remembered the way Iris had explored the house with cautious wonder, the way she'd curled up in the guest room bed like she belonged there, the way she'd created art at their kitchen table with the focused intensity of someone who'd found their calling. Yes, he said with certainty. I think she does. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Riverside for the second night in a row, and in a sterile facility across town, a 4-year-old girl clutched a bag of art supplies and tried not to cry as she listened to the sounds of other displaced children settling in for another night of uncertainty. The system had done what systems do. It had processed, categorized, and filed away a problem. But what it hadn't counted on was the determination of a guilt-ridden father and a disabled boy who had found purpose in protecting someone smaller and more vulnerable than themselves. Riverside Group Home sat on the outskirts of town like a forgotten afterthought, a 2-story brick building that had once housed a small medical clinic before budget cuts transformed it into temporary housing for displaced children. The parking lot was cracked and weedy, and the playground equipment looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and good intentions. Iris pressed her face against the passenger window of the social services van as they pulled up to the building. After months of sleeping under open sky, the institutional walls felt suffocating before she'd even stepped inside. It's not so bad once you get used to it, said Kevin, the 11-year-old boy sitting beside her. He'd been picked up from another temporary placement that morning. His 4th in 6 months, he'd informed her with the weary expertise of a seasoned system veteran. The food's okay, and Miss Dorothy doesn't yell much, unless you really mess up. Dorothy Hendricks had been running the group home for 12 years, ever since her own children had grown and moved away, leaving her with too much maternal energy and not enough outlets for it. She was a large woman with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes that had seen too many children come and go to allow herself to get too attached to any of them. "Welcome to Riverside," she said, as Iris climbed down from the van, clutching her small bag of belongings. "I'm Miss Dorothy. You'll be in room 3 with Jenny and Sophia. They'll show you the rules." The interior of the group home was clean but institutional. Linoleum floors, fluorescent lighting, and walls painted in the kind of cheerful yellow that was supposed to be uplifting, but somehow managed to feel artificial instead. 8 children called this place home, ranging in age from Iris at 4 to Marcus at 15, who'd been here so long he'd become Miss Dorothy's unofficial assistant. Room 3 was small and cramped, with 3 twin beds lined up against the walls and a single dresser they were expected to share. Jenny, age 7, had claimed the bed by the window and defended her territory with the fierce determination of someone who'd learned that in institutions you protected what little space you could call your own. Sophia, 6, was quieter, more withdrawn, spending most of her time reading books that were too advanced for her age. "Where did you come from?" Jenny asked as Iris set her bag on the remaining bed. "A mansion," Iris replied honestly, then added, "But I lived on the streets before that." Both girls stared at her with new interest. Street kids were rare in the group home system. Most children Iris's age, who ended up homeless, were found quickly and processed into care. The fact that she'd survived on her own for 2 months gave her a certain credibility among her peers. "Why didn't they let you stay at the mansion?" Sophia asked. Iris considered the question. She was too young to fully understand concepts like legal guardianship and proper documentation, but she grasped the basic unfairness of being removed from a place where she'd felt safe and cared for. "Because I didn't have the right papers," she said finally. "And because sometimes adults have to follow rules, even when the rules don't make sense." That first night at dinner, Iris met the rest of the residents. Marcus, the 15-year-old, had been in care since he was 8 and served as a mentor to the younger children, Twins Emma and Ethan, both 9, had been removed from their home 3 months ago and were still hoping to be reunited with their mother once she completed rehabilitation. Kevin, her van companion, had behavioral issues that made him difficult to place in traditional foster homes, and quiet little Timothy, only 5, rarely spoke to anyone except in whispers to his stuffed elephant. The food was adequate but institutional, mass-produced and lacking the love that had flavored Maria's home-cooked meals. Iris ate mechanically, her mind drifting to the flower-shaped pancakes and the warmth of the Vasconcellos' kitchen. "You're thinking about where you came from," Marcus observed, settling beside her at the long dining table. "That's normal. We all do that at first." "Do you still think about your first home?" Iris asked. Marcus's expression darkened. "My first home wasn't a place anyone should think about," he said quietly. "But yeah, I think about the good places I've been. There was this foster family when I was 10, the Johnsons. They had a big dog and a tire swing in their backyard. I thought I might get to stay there forever. What happened? Mrs. Johnson got sick, cancer. They couldn't keep me while she was doing treatment." He shrugged with practiced indifference, but Iris could see the old hurt in his eyes. The system happened. After dinner, children scattered to their various activities. Some watched television in the common room, others did homework at the dining table, and a few played quiet games in the hallway. Iris found herself drawn to a corner near the window, where the late afternoon light was still strong enough to draw by. She opened her bag and pulled out the art supplies Caio had given her. The charcoal pencils felt familiar and comforting in her small hands, and soon she was lost in creating images that flowed from some deep place inside her. Birds again, but also faces. Caio's serious expression as he'd taught her to shade properly. Maria's kind eyes as she'd served breakfast. Leandro's strong hands pulling her from the pool water. "Those are really good," said a voice behind her. Iris turned to find Miss Dorothy studying her drawings with genuine interest. Up close, the older woman's face was softer than her administrative demeanor suggested, marked by laugh lines and the kind of tiredness that came from caring for too many children with too few resources. "Where did you learn to draw like that?" "A boy named Caio taught me," Iris replied. "He lives in the mansion where I stayed before I came here." Miss Dorothy settled into a nearby chair with some difficulty. Her knees bothered her more each year, but she'd never admit it to the children who needed her to be strong. "Tell me about this mansion." So Iris did. She described the pool where she saved Caio's life, the kitchen where Maria had made her feel safe, the bedroom with clean sheets and soft pillows, and the hours spent drawing at the table while rain drummed against the windows. As she talked, her pencil moved across the paper, creating a detailed sketch of the house that had briefly been home. "Sounds like a nice place," Miss Dorothy said carefully. "Do you think they'll come visit you?" Iris looked up from her drawing, hope and uncertainty warring in her young face. "Caio said his dad would figure something out, but adults say lots of things they don't really mean." The observation was so wise and so heartbreaking that Miss Dorothy had to clear her throat before responding. "Some adults keep their promises," she said gently. "The trick is figuring out which ones." That night, as Iris lay in her narrow bed listening to Jenny's quiet snoring and Sophia's occasional sleep-talking, she stared at the ceiling and tried to hold on to the memories of her brief time with the Vasconcellos family. Already, the details were starting to feel dreamlike. Had the pancakes really been shaped like flowers, or was she remembering something from a picture book? Had Caio's laugh been as warm as she recalled, or was her mind adding sweetness to dull the pain of missing him? She pulled the covers over her head and whispered to herself in the darkness, practicing the words Caio had taught her for different art techniques, repeating Maria's Spanish endearments, trying to keep alive the sound of Leandro's voice saying her name. These memories were all she had left of feeling like she belonged somewhere, and she was terrified of losing them the way she'd eventually lost most of her memories of Grandma Rose. 3 doors down, Miss Dorothy sat at her desk, completing the daily reports that were required for each child in her care. When she reached Iris's file, she paused, pen hovering over the form. In the section marked Behavioral Observations, she wrote, "Child shows exceptional artistic ability and emotional maturity beyond her years. Has formed strong attachment to previous placement family. Recommend psychological evaluation to assess trauma impact and placement needs." She didn't write what she was really thinking, that in 12 years of running the group home, she'd rarely seen a 4-year-old who'd been so profoundly affected by a temporary placement. Most children Iris's age adapted to new situations with the resilience that was both childhood's blessing and its curse. But this little girl was different. She'd found something at the Vasconcelos house that had awakened a hunger for family and belonging that would be difficult to satisfy in the institutional setting of group care. Outside, the storm that had been threatening finally broke, sending rain against the windows in steady sheets. In room 3, Iris listened to the sound and remembered another rainy night when she'd felt safe and warm and wanted. She pressed her face into the pillow to muffle her tears, not wanting to wake her roommates with her sadness. Tomorrow, she would learn, brought visitors and news that would shake the carefully controlled world of Riverside Group Home in ways no one could have anticipated. Leandro arrived at Riverside Group Home the next morning with a determination that had kept him awake most of the night. He'd spent hours researching foster care requirements, emergency custody procedures, and child welfare laws, trying to find some loophole or expedited process that could bring Iris home. What he discovered instead was a bureaucratic maze designed to protect children through layers of red tape that could take months to navigate. Miss Dorothy met him in the facility's small office, a cramped space dominated by filing cabinets and a desk covered with forms requiring attention. Through the window, he could see children playing in the fenced backyard, but no sign of Iris among them. "She's having her mandatory psychological evaluation," Miss Dorothy explained, noting his searching gaze. "Dr. Rebecca Morris comes in twice a week to assess new arrivals. It's standard procedure. How is she adjusting?" Leandro asked, settling into the visitor's chair that had been positioned at a carefully calculated distance from the desk, close enough for conversation, far enough to maintain professional boundaries. Miss Dorothy considered her words carefully. In her experience, temporary caregivers often promised more than they could deliver, leaving children disappointed when reality failed to match their expectations. But there was something different about this man, a genuine urgency that went beyond guilt or obligation. "She's struggling more than most children her age," she admitted. "Usually 4-year-olds adapt quickly to new environments. They're resilient. But Iris has formed unusually strong attachments for such a brief placement. She talks about your family constantly." "We want her back," Leandro said without preamble. "I know we should have handled things differently from the beginning, but we want to make this right. What do we need to do?" Before Miss Dorothy could respond, shouting erupted from the hallway. Through the thin walls, they could hear a child's voice, raised in distress, followed by the calm, professional tones of the psychologist trying to de-escalate the situation. "I want to go home!" The voice was unmistakably Iris's, though pitched higher with panic than Leandro had ever heard it. "I want to go home to Caio and Maria and Mr. Leandro. I don't belong here." Miss Dorothy was already moving toward the door. "Sometimes the evaluations can be triggering," she explained apologetically. "Dr. Morris is excellent with children, but when they've been through trauma—" They found Dr. Morris in the evaluation room, trying to coax Iris out from under a desk where she'd taken refuge. The psychologist was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone accustomed to working with frightened children, but even her considerable skills seemed insufficient for the level of distress Iris was experiencing. "I don't want to talk about my feelings anymore," Iris sobbed from her hiding spot. "I don't want to draw pictures about sad things. I just want to go home." Iris, Leandro said softly, dropping to his knees beside the desk. It's Mr. Leandro. I'm here. The change was immediate and dramatic. Iris scrambled out from under the desk and threw herself into his arms with such force that he nearly lost his balance. Her small body shook with the intensity of her relief, and he could feel her tears soaking through his shirt. "You came," she whispered against his shoulder. "I thought you forgot about me." "I could never forget about you," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been thinking about you every minute since you left." Dr. Morris observed this reunion with professional interest. She'd seen plenty of children react strongly to familiar faces, but this level of attachment after such a brief placement was unusual. The child's distress had been immediate and profound when separated from the Vasconcellos family, suggesting bonds that went deeper than typical temporary care relationships. "Perhaps we could continue our evaluation another time," she said diplomatically, "when Iris is feeling more settled." As they moved to a quieter room, Iris refused to let go of Leandro's hand. She told him about her first night in the group home, about her roommates, Jenny and Sophia, about the institutional food and the strange sounds that kept her awake. But mostly, she talked about how much she missed their house, missed Caio's art lessons and Maria's cooking, and the feeling of being part of a real family. "Caio sent you something," Leandro said, pulling a folded paper from his jacket pocket. Iris opened it to find a detailed drawing of their kitchen table covered with art supplies, with a note written in Caio's careful handwriting. "For Iris, your place at our table is waiting for you. Don't give up. Love, your brother Caio." The word brother made Iris's eyes fill with fresh tears, but these were different tears, not the hopeless sobs of abandonment, but the complex emotions of someone who'd found family in unexpected places and was fighting to keep it. "He calls me his sister now," she said wonderfully. "Do you think that's okay?" "I think that's more than okay," Leandro replied. "I think that's exactly right." Their conversation was interrupted by Miss Dorothy, who appeared in the doorway with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Mr. Vasconcellos, there's someone here to see you. Someone who might change everything." The someone turned out to be an elderly woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that held a mixture of nervousness and determination. She clutched a worn leather purse in arthritic hands and studied Iris with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that had been bothering her for months. "I'm Eleanor Patterson," she announced. "I believe you have my great niece." The room fell silent. Iris looked up from Caio's drawing with confusion clear on her face. "I don't know you," she said with the blunt honesty of childhood. "No, you wouldn't," Eleanor replied gently. "But I knew your grandmother Rose very well. We were sisters." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Iris had family, real biological family, and she'd been living in the system unnecessarily while her great-aunt searched for her. Leandro felt his heart sink as he realized what this meant. All his plans to navigate foster care certification and bring Iris home were about to become irrelevant. "I've been looking for Iris ever since I heard about Rose's passing," Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "Rose and I had a falling out years ago over something so stupid I can barely remember what it was about now. Pride, I suppose. We both had too much of it. But when I learned she was gone, and that there was a child..." She trailed off, studying Iris with eyes that were filling with tears. "You look just like Rose did at your age. Same golden curls, same serious expression when you're thinking hard about something." Dr. Morris stepped forward, her professional instincts taking over. "Mrs. Patterson, I assume you've been in contact with Child Protective Services about establishing custody." "I've been working with them for weeks," Eleanor confirmed. "Background checks, home studies, all of it. They told me it could take months to locate Iris, that children sometimes disappeared into the system for extended periods. But then I saw the newspaper article about the art exhibition at the elementary school. There was a photo of her drawings, and I recognized Rose's old techniques. She always taught children to draw birds first. Iris had grown very quiet during this exchange, her small hand still clutching Leandro's with desperate intensity. At 4 years old, she couldn't fully comprehend the legal implications of what was happening, but she understood enough to know that another change was coming, another upheaval in a life that had already contained too many. "What happens now?" Leandro asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Now I take my great-niece home where she belongs," Eleanor said with gentle firmness. "I have a house in Knoxville with a garden where Rose and I used to play when we were girls. There's a room prepared for Iris, with proper furniture and toys and everything a little girl needs." But what about what she wants? The question came from an unexpected source, Iris herself, speaking with a clarity that surprised all the adults in the room. Eleanor looked taken aback. "Well, sweetheart, of course you want to be with family. Real family." "They are my real family," Iris said, gesturing toward Leandro. "Caio is my brother and Maria takes care of me and Mr. Leandro saved me from drowning in sadness. You're a nice lady, but you're a stranger." The simple truth of this statement hung in the air like a challenge to everything the adults had assumed about family, blood ties, and what was best for children. Eleanor's face crumpled with hurt, while Leandro felt a surge of pride at Iris's courage in speaking her truth. "Sometimes, Doctor," Morris said carefully, "the best interests of a child involve more complex considerations than just biological relationships." But even as she spoke, everyone in the room knew that legally, Eleanor Patterson held all the cards. She was blood family, she'd passed the required evaluations, and she had the full support of the child welfare system behind her. The battle for Iris's future was about to begin in earnest, and the outcome would depend on whether love could triumph over law and whether a 4-year-old's voice would be heard above the bureaucratic machinery designed to protect her. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following Monday, giving both sides exactly 5 days to prepare their arguments. Eleanor Patterson had enlisted the help of a family law attorney who specialized in reuniting children with biological relatives, while Leandro found himself scrambling to understand a legal system he'd never had reason to navigate before. "The law heavily favors blood relatives," his attorney, David Chen, explained during an emergency weekend meeting at his office. "Unless we can prove she's unfit, or that placement with her would be detrimental to Iris's well-being, the court will almost certainly award custody to the great-aunt." "She's not unfit," Leandro admitted reluctantly. "From what I've learned, she's a retired teacher, owns her home outright, and has no criminal history. On paper, she's an ideal guardian." "Then we need to focus on the attachment argument," David suggested. "The psychological evaluation, Doctor. Morris conducted shows clear signs of bonding with your family. If we can demonstrate that separating Iris from you would cause significant trauma, but would that be enough to override biological family claims?" David's expression was grim. "Honestly, probably not. Courts are very reluctant to deny custody to suitable blood relatives, especially when the current placement isn't legally formalized." Meanwhile, at the group home, Iris was struggling to process the emotions surrounding Eleanor's appearance. The older woman had returned twice to visit, bringing photo albums filled with pictures of Rose as a young woman, stories about their childhood together, and gifts carefully chosen for a 4-year-old. A stuffed rabbit, coloring books, a music box that played lullabies. "She seems nice," Jenny observed as they watched Eleanor's car pull away after the second visit. "And she's got pictures of your grandma." "That's something." "I know she's nice," Iris replied, clutching the stuffed rabbit Eleanor had brought. "But nice isn't the same as family. Family is when someone sees you drowning and jumps in without thinking about whether they can swim." The wisdom in this statement, delivered with the matter-of-fact clarity that only children possessed, left Miss Dorothy speechless. She'd watched hundreds of children navigate the complexities of foster care and family reunification, but rarely had she seen a 4-year-old articulate such a clear understanding of what love actually meant. Kaio was taking the news of Eleanor's appearance worse than anyone. Since learning about the custody hearing, he'd become withdrawn and irritable, snapping at Maria when she tried to help him with routine tasks, and refusing to participate in the physical therapy sessions that usually helped manage his pain and mobility. "She doesn't even know Iris," he argued during a family meeting Leandro had called to discuss their options. "She wasn't there when Iris was sleeping under bridges or eating garbage. She wasn't there when Iris had nightmares about being alone forever. How can some stranger just show up and claim her because they share DNA?" "I know it doesn't seem fair," Leandro said, though privately he agreed completely with his son's assessment. "But the law exists to protect children by ensuring they're placed with family members who can provide stable, long-term care." "We can provide stable, long-term care," Kaio protested. "We already have been providing it. Iris belongs here with us. Legally, we're not her family," Maria said gently, though the words clearly pained her to speak. "In the eyes of the court, we're just temporary caregivers." "Then the law is stupid," Kaio declared with the righteous anger of a 12-year-old who'd seen too much injustice for his age. "Laws should protect people, not separate them from the families they choose." The day before the hearing, Eleanor requested a private meeting with Leandro. They met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory that wouldn't overwhelm either of them with the emotional weight of their competing claims to Iris's future. "I want you to know, I don't take any pleasure in this situation," Eleanor began, stirring her tea with nervous energy. "I can see that Iris has formed strong attachments to your family, and I appreciate everything you've done for her. But you're still going to fight for custody," Leandro observed. "She's my blood," Eleanor said simply. "Rose's granddaughter, the last connection I have to my sister and the family we both came from. You have to understand, I lost touch with Rose over something so petty I'm ashamed to even remember it now. This is my chance to make amends, to honor her memory by taking care of the child she loved." Leandro studied the older woman across the table, seeing genuine pain in her eyes alongside the determination. Eleanor wasn't a villain trying to steal Iris away out of malice. She was a grieving woman seeking redemption through caring for her great niece. "What if there was another way?" he asked suddenly. "What if you could honor Rose's memory and be part of Iris's life without taking her away from the family she's already chosen?" Eleanor looked skeptical. "What are you suggesting?" "Shared custody. Visits. A relationship that doesn't require destroying the bonds she's already formed." Leandro leaned forward, his voice gaining intensity as the idea took shape. "She could spend summers with you in Knoxville, learn about her grandmother's family history, maintain that connection to Rose, but her primary home would remain with us." "I don't think the court would approve such an arrangement," Eleanor said slowly. "They like clean, simple custody decisions." "Maybe not," Leandro admitted. "But maybe it's worth exploring for Iris's sake." Their conversation was interrupted by Eleanor's phone ringing. The caller ID showed CPS, and her face grew tense as she answered. The conversation was brief, but clearly significant, judging by the way her expression shifted from concern to shock to something approaching dismay. "What is it?" Leandro asked when she hung up. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, staring at her phone as if it might change the message she'd just received. "There's been a complication," she said finally. "The background check turned up something unexpected, something that might change everything." "What kind of complication?" "It seems," Eleanor said carefully, "that I'm not the only family member looking for Iris. Rose apparently had another sister, our younger sister Margaret, who gave up a child for adoption 40 years ago. That child, now an adult, has been searching for biological family and recently learned about Rose's death and the existence of a great niece." Leandro felt his stomach drop. "Another relative wants custody?" Not custody, exactly. But they filed a petition to be considered as a placement option. It's complicated. The implications hit them both simultaneously. If multiple family members were claiming rights to Iris, the court case could drag on for months while investigations were conducted and competing claims were evaluated. During that time, Iris would remain in limbo, either in the group home or in temporary placements while adults fought over her future. "This is going to destroy her," Leandro said quietly. "She's already been through abandonment, homelessness, and multiple placement changes. Now she's going to become the subject of a custody battle between strangers who all claim to love her." Eleanor nodded slowly, her earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty. "Maybe," she said hesitantly, "we should think about what's truly best for Iris, rather than what we want for ourselves." It was the first crack in Eleanor's absolute certainty about claiming custody, and Leandro recognized it as possibly their only hope. But even as he felt a surge of optimism, he knew that the appearance of yet another potential guardian would complicate an already impossible situation. That evening, he sat in Iris's temporarily empty bedroom at the mansion, surrounded by the drawings she'd created during her brief stay with them. Each picture told a story of hope and belonging, of a child who'd found her place in the world only to have it threatened by the very systems designed to protect her. Tomorrow's hearing would determine not just where Iris would live, but whether the bonds of chosen family could ever be as strong as the claims of blood relation in the eyes of the law. And somewhere in a group home across town, a 4-year-old girl was trying to sleep, while adults she'd never met before this week, prepared to argue over her future like she was a piece of property to be awarded to the highest bidder. The only certainty was that whatever the court decided, someone was going to be heartbroken, and that someone might very well be the child they were all claiming to want to protect. The Hamilton County Family Court was a sterile building that smelled of floor polish and nervous energy. As Leandro walked through the metal detectors Monday morning, he caught sight of Eleanor Patterson sitting alone on a bench in the hallway, her hands folded tightly in her lap and her face pale with anxiety. Across the waiting area, a woman he didn't recognize paced back and forth while speaking urgently into her phone. "That must be Margaret Patterson Williams," David Chen murmured, nodding toward the pacing woman. "The other sister." Her attorney filed additional motions over the weekend. Margaret Patterson Williams was nothing like Eleanor. Where Eleanor dressed conservatively and spoke in measured tones, Margaret wore expensive clothes and commanded attention with her gestures. She was younger than Eleanor by several years, with auburn hair styled in a modern cut and the kind of confident bearing that suggested success in business or law. "She looks like she's used to getting what she wants," Leandro observed. "She's a successful real estate developer in Atlanta," David replied, consulting his notes. "Divorced, no children of her own, and apparently very motivated to create a relationship with her only known blood relative." Judge Patricia Hawthorne entered the courtroom with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent 20 years making impossible decisions about children's lives. She was a small woman with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, known throughout the legal community for her thorough preparation and her willingness to challenge attorneys who came to her court unprepared. "This is an unusual case," she began, reviewing the thick file before her. "We have a 4-year-old child who has been placed temporarily with non-relatives following the death of her grandmother and caregiver. 2 biological relatives have now stepped forward claiming custody rights, and the temporary caregivers are requesting consideration for permanent placement. The child's best interests must be our primary concern." Sarah Martinez from Child Protective Services presented the case background, outlining Iris's journey from homelessness to rescue to temporary placement with the Vasconcelos family, followed by her current residence at the group home. Her report was clinical and thorough, but somehow missed the emotional reality of a 4-year-old's experience navigating these traumatic changes. Eleanor's attorney spoke first, painting a picture of a stable, loving home environment where Iris would be surrounded by family history and continuity. "My client offers not just a home, but a connection to the child's roots," he argued. Eleanor Patterson was Rose Patterson's sister, and she can provide Iris with stories, photographs, and memories that will help her understand where she comes from. Margaret's attorney countered with arguments about resources and opportunities. Margaret Patterson Williams can provide educational advantages, travel opportunities, and financial security that will give this child every possible chance for success in life, she stated. She has the means to provide private schooling, college savings, and experiences that will broaden Iris's horizons significantly. When it came time for David Chen to present Leandro's case, he faced the daunting task of arguing that chosen family could be legally superior to biological family. "Your Honor, this isn't about blood relations or financial resources," he began. "This is about attachment, stability, and the bonds that have already formed between this child and the people who saved her life, literally and figuratively." He called Dr. Morris to testify about her psychological evaluation of Iris. The psychologist's testimony was damaging to the biological relatives' cases. "The child shows clear signs of attachment disorder symptoms when separated from the Vasconcelos family," she explained. "Her distress levels during our evaluation sessions were consistent with separation anxiety, typically seen in children removed from primary attachment figures." "And in your professional opinion," David asked, "what would be the psychological impact of permanently separating Iris from the Vasconcelos family?" "Potentially severe," Dr. Morris replied. "At her developmental stage, disrupting established attachment bonds can result in long-term trust issues, difficulty forming future relationships, and increased risk of behavioral problems." Margaret's attorney was aggressive in cross-examination. "Dr. Morris, isn't it true that children are remarkably resilient and typically adapt well to new environments when provided with adequate love and support?" "Children are resilient, Doctor." Morris agreed, "but that doesn't mean we should intentionally expose them to trauma when alternatives exist." The most powerful moment came when Judge Hawthorne requested to speak with Iris privately in her chambers. The judge had developed a reputation for listening carefully to children's voices in custody cases, recognizing that even young children often had clear preferences and valid reasons for those preferences. Iris entered the judge's chambers wearing a yellow dress that Miss Dorothy had bought specifically for court, her golden curls brushed until they shone. She carried a folder containing some of her drawings, which she'd insisted on bringing to show the judge. "Hello, Iris," Judge Hawthorne said gently, gesturing to a child-sized chair positioned near her desk. "I'm Judge Hawthorne, and I want to ask you some questions about your family. Is that okay?" "Okay," Iris replied, settling into the chair, but keeping her folder clutched tightly against her chest. "Can you tell me about the people who take care of you?" "Well," Iris began seriously, "Miss Dorothy at the group home gives me food and a bed, but that's not really taking care of someone. Taking care of someone is when Caio teaches me how to draw birds so they look like they're really flying. And when Maria makes pancakes shaped like flowers, because she remembers my grandma used to do that. And when Mr. Leandro pulls you out of the pool, even though you're just a stranger who climbed his fence. What about Mrs. Eleanor and Mrs. Margaret? They want to take care of you, too." Iris considered this thoughtfully. "They seem nice, but they don't know me yet. Mrs. Eleanor has pictures of my grandma, which is good because I was starting to forget what Grandma Rose looked like. And Mrs. Margaret says she could take me to Disney World, but what? But you can't just decide to love someone because they're related to you. Love has to grow like plants do. It needs time and water and good dirt." Iris opened her folder and pulled out a drawing of a small seedling growing in a pot. This is love growing. You can't make it happen fast just because you want to. Judge Hawthorne studied the drawing, recognizing the sophisticated metaphor coming from such a young child. Where do you think your love has grown the most? In K.O.'s family, Iris said without hesitation. Even when I was scared or sad, they kept watering it with kindness until it got strong enough to bloom. She showed the judge another drawing, a flowering plant with faces in the blooms that clearly represented Leandro, Caio, and Maria. What would happen if you had to go live with Mrs. Eleanor or Mrs. Margaret? Iris was quiet for a long moment, her small brow furrowed in concentration. I think the love plant might get shocked and stop growing for a while. Maybe it would start growing again eventually, but it would be different, smaller, and the big love plant I already grew would probably die without the right people to take care of it. The simple honesty of this explanation hit Judge Hawthorne harder than hours of legal arguments had. Here was a 4-year-old who understood attachment theory better than many adults, who could articulate the difference between potential relationships and established bonds with remarkable clarity. Is there anything else you want to tell me, Iris? Just that I know Mrs. Eleanor and Mrs. Margaret think they're doing the right thing. Grown-ups usually think they know what's best for kids. But sometimes grown-ups get confused about the difference between what they want and what's actually good for someone. After Iris returned to the courtroom, Judge Hawthorne called a recess to review all the testimony and evidence. The waiting period stretched endlessly, with each party retreating to separate areas of the courthouse to avoid the awkwardness of forced conversation. Eleanor approached Leandro during the break, her face troubled. I listened to what she said in there, she admitted quietly. About love needing time to grow. She's right, isn't she? I can't just claim to love her because she's Rose's granddaughter. You could learn to love her, Leandro replied gently. Given time and the right circumstances, but not if I tear her away from the people she's already learned to love. Before Leandro could respond, Margaret interrupted their conversation. I couldn't help overhearing, she said, her earlier confidence visibly shaken. That little girl is remarkable. The way she explained attachment and love, she's incredibly mature for her age. She's had to be mature, Eleanor said sadly. She's been through more loss than most adults. Maybe, Margaret said hesitantly, we've been approaching this all wrong. Maybe this isn't about who deserves custody, but about what would actually make her happy. It was the first time either biological relative had acknowledged that their desires might not align with Iris's best interests, and Leandro felt a cautious hope that some compromise might be possible. But when court reconvened and Judge Hawthorne returned to the bench, her expression was unreadable. The decision she was about to render would determine not just where Iris would live, but whether the legal system could recognize that sometimes the families we choose are more powerful than the families we're born into. Judge Hawthorne's voice cut through the tense silence of the courtroom like a blade. Before I render my decision, I'm going to take an unusual step. I'm calling a 48-hour recess to allow all parties to consider whether there might be a solution that serves Iris's best interests better than a traditional custody award. The unexpected delay sent ripples of confusion through the courtroom. Leandro felt his stomach clench with anxiety. Did this mean the judge was leaning toward the biological relatives? David Chen's expression was equally puzzled. In 20 years of family law practice, he'd never seen a judge delay a custody decision in this manner. Your Honor, Margaret's attorney interjected, my client is prepared to accept custody immediately. We don't see the need for additional delay. Nevertheless, Judge Hawthorne replied firmly, this court believes that all parties would benefit from reflection. Sometimes the most creative solutions emerge when people step back from adversarial positions and consider the child's needs holistically. As they filed out of the courtroom, Eleanor caught up with Leandro in the hallway. Her face was drawn with exhaustion and something that looked like growing doubt about her position. "Mr. Vasconcelos, could we talk, privately?" she asked, glancing meaningfully at Margaret, who was engaged in heated conversation with her attorney nearby. They found a quiet corner of the courthouse cafeteria, an unlikely setting for what would prove to be a pivotal conversation. Eleanor stirred her coffee absently, her hands trembling slightly. Whether from caffeine or emotion, Leandro couldn't tell. "I haven't been sleeping," she admitted. "Ever since I heard Iris speak in the judge's chambers, I can't stop thinking about what she said. About love needing time to grow, about not being able to force family bonds just because you want them to exist." "She's a remarkable child," Leandro agreed, "wise beyond her years." "That's just it. She shouldn't have to be wise beyond her years. She should be able to be a normal 4-year-old who worries about toys and cartoons, not about whether the adults in her life are going to uproot her again." Eleanor's voice cracked slightly. "I told myself I was doing this for Rose, to honor her memory by caring for her granddaughter, but maybe I've been doing it for me, to assuage my guilt about the years Rose and I spent estranged." Leandro chose his words carefully. "Wanting to connect with family isn't wrong, Eleanor. And Iris could benefit from knowing about her grandmother's side of the family, learning those stories and seeing those photographs you showed her. But not at the cost of destroying the relationships that are already sustaining her," Eleanor said, more to herself than to him. "God, what have I done? That child was finally safe and loved, and I've turned her life into a legal battleground." Their conversation was interrupted by Margaret's approach. The younger Patterson sister looked significantly less polished than she had that morning, her confident demeanor replaced by something that might have been genuine uncertainty. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Margaret said, settling uninvited into the empty chair at their table. "But I think we need to have an honest conversation about what's really happening here." Eleanor looked up wearily. "What do you mean?" I've been watching that little girl for 3 days now, and I've realized something that makes me profoundly uncomfortable." Margaret paused, seeming to gather courage for whatever admission was coming. "She's terrified of us, both of us. Oh, she's polite and she answers our questions, but she looks at us the way cornered animals look at predators." "She's just shy around strangers," Eleanor protested weakly. "No, Eleanor, it's not shyness, it's fear. She's afraid we're going to tear apart the only stable family she's known in months, maybe years." Margaret's voice grew stronger as she continued. "I came here thinking I could give her opportunities, advantages, a better life. But I've been so focused on what I could provide that I never stopped to ask what she actually needs." "And what does she need?" Leandro asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "She needs to stop being afraid that the next adult who claims to love her is going to disappear or change the rules without warning," Margaret said bluntly. "She needs consistency, stability, and the knowledge that the people she's attached to aren't going to abandon her or get taken away by strangers with better legal claims." Eleanor was crying now, quiet tears that spoke of a grief deeper than missing her sister. "I wanted so badly to have family again. After Rose died, I felt so alone. When I learned about Iris, it seemed like a gift, a chance to have someone to love and care for, someone who connected me to Rose." "You're not the only one feeling alone," Margaret admitted. "I never married, never had children. Building my business was everything for 30 years, and suddenly I'm 52 and realizing that money and success don't keep you warm at night. When I heard about Iris, I thought maybe I could have the family I'd always been too busy to create. But families can't be built on need and loneliness," Leandro said gently. "They have to be built on what's best for the children involved." "So what do we do?" Eleanor asked, wiping her eyes with a crumpled tissue. "Margaret and I both have legal standing. The court could award custody to either of us, and there's nothing you could do to stop it." It was Margaret who voiced the solution that had been taking shape in all their minds. "What if we found a way to all be Iris's family? Not through custody battles, but through choice. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we stop fighting each other and start working together. Margaret's business training was evident in the way she began organizing her thoughts. Eleanor, you have the family history, the connection to Rose's memory. I have resources and the ability to provide opportunities. Mr. Vasconcellos, you and your son have her heart and her trust. Joint custody arrangements are complex, Leandro said cautiously. Not joint custody, Margaret corrected. Something more creative. What if Eleanor and I withdrew our custody petitions and instead asked the court to allow us to be part of Iris's extended family? Visits, holidays, summer trips, the kind of relationships aunts typically have with beloved nieces. Eleanor looked startled. You'd give up your legal claim? If it means Iris gets to stay with the people she's chosen as family. Yes. Margaret's voice grew firmer as she spoke. I've spent my career making deals that benefit everyone involved. This doesn't have to be a zero-sum situation where someone wins and everyone else loses. The court would need to approve any such arrangement, Leandro pointed out. And there would need to be formal agreements about visitation, involvement in major decisions, that sort of thing. But is it something you'd be willing to consider? Eleanor asked, hope creeping into her voice for the first time in days. Leandro thought about Caio's desperate desire to keep his chosen sister, about Maria's tears when Iris was taken to the group home, about the way their house had felt empty without the sound of a 4-year-old's laughter filling the rooms. He thought about Iris's drawings of families gathered around dinner tables, her hunger for belonging that went far beyond material needs. Yes, he said simply. It's exactly what I'd be willing to consider. That evening, Leandro returned home to find Caio in the living room, staring at one of Iris's drawings taped to the wall, the picture of their kitchen table covered with art supplies. How did it go? Caio asked without looking up. Complicated, Leandro replied, settling beside his son. But maybe in a good way. He explained the proposal that had emerged from his conversation with Eleanor and Margaret, watching as hope and skepticism warred on Caio's face. You think they really mean it? Caio asked. They'd really give up trying to take her away. I think they're beginning to understand what Iris has been trying to tell everyone all along, that love isn't something you can claim or win in court. It's something that grows between people who choose to care for each other. So she could come home. Maybe. If the judge approves the arrangement, and if everyone involved can figure out how to make it work. For the first time in days, Caio smiled. Iris was right about the love plant thing. Some families grow naturally, and some families you have to plant on purpose. But either way, they need the right conditions to flourish. Outside, storm clouds were gathering over Riverside once again, but this time the approaching weather felt less like a threat and more like a cleansing rain that might wash away the complications and leave room for something new and better to grow in their place. In 48 hours, they would return to court with a proposal that challenged everything the legal system typically understood about family, custody, and the best interests of children. The question now was whether Judge Hawthorne would be willing to take the same creative risk that 3 adults had taken in choosing to put a 4-year-old's happiness ahead of their own desires for traditional family structures. The 48-hour recess passed in a whirlwind of legal consultations, drafted agreements, and careful conversations with social workers who seemed both intrigued and skeptical about the unprecedented arrangement being proposed. Eleanor and Margaret had spent hours together for the first time in years, working through decades of family dynamics while trying to create a framework that would serve Iris's needs rather than their own. But the most important conversation happened at the group home, where Iris sat cross-legged on her narrow bed, while Leandro explained the possibility that all the adults who claimed to love her might find a way to do so without tearing her away from the family she'd chosen. So Mrs. Eleanor and Mrs. Margaret wouldn't take me to live with them? Iris asked, her 4-year-old mind struggling to process the complex arrangement being described. "They would be your family, but not your everyday family," Leandro tried to explain. "Like how some children have aunts and uncles who love them and visit for holidays, but they still live with their parents. And I could stay with you and Caio and Maria? If the judge agrees, yes, you could stay with us." Iris was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the serious consideration she brought to all important matters. Would Mrs. Eleanor still show me pictures of Grandma Rose? I think she would love to do that, and Mrs. Margaret could take you on special trips sometimes if you wanted to go. But I would always come back to our house? Always. For the first time since the custody battle began, Iris's smile was genuine and uncomplicated. That sounds like having a really big family. Like in the books, where people have lots of aunts and uncles and cousins, all gathered around for Thanksgiving dinner. Exactly like that, Leandro agreed, though privately he wondered if the reality would be as simple as Iris imagined. Wednesday morning brought them all back to Judge Hawthorne's courtroom, but the atmosphere was dramatically different from Monday's adversarial proceedings. Eleanor and Margaret sat together, their attorneys flanking them but looking notably less combative. David Chen had spent the previous day drafting a proposed agreement that would make Leandro and Maria Iris's legal guardians, while granting Eleanor and Margaret specific visitation rights and involvement in major decisions about her education and healthcare. "This is highly unusual," Judge Hawthorne began, reviewing the documentation that had been submitted. "I've been on the bench for 20 years. And I've never seen biological relatives voluntarily relinquish custody claims in favor of such an arrangement." Eleanor's attorney spoke first. "Your Honor, my client has come to believe that Iris's emotional well-being must take precedence over traditional family structures. She wants to be part of Iris's life, but not at the cost of traumatizing the child by severing established attachments." "And Mrs. Patterson Williams?" Margaret stood to address the court directly, having decided that her attorney couldn't adequately convey the personal journey that had led to this decision. "Your Honor, I came here thinking I could provide opportunities and advantages that would give Iris a better life. But I've realized that the best life for a 4-year-old isn't necessarily the one with the most material benefits. It's the one where she feels secure, loved and free to be a child rather than a prize to be won in legal battles." Judge Hawthorne studied both women carefully. "You understand that this arrangement would significantly limit your legal rights regarding this child? You would be extended family members, not guardians. You couldn't make unilateral decisions about her care, education, or residence." "We understand," Eleanor said firmly. "And we accept those limitations. What about you, Mr. Vasconcelos? Are you prepared to take on the legal and financial responsibilities of guardianship, knowing that this child has biological relatives who will remain involved in her life?" Leandro rose, thinking of all the conversations he'd had with Caio and Maria over the past 2 days, the way they'd all agreed without hesitation that they wanted Iris as a permanent member of their family, regardless of complications or challenges. "Your Honor, Iris saved my son's life, but more than that, she saved our family's capacity to love openly again. We've been through loss and grief that made us forget how to hope for good things. She reminded us that families aren't just about blood or legal documents. They're about people who choose to care for each other through difficult times. And you believe you can provide the stability and consistency this child needs?" "I know we can. She's already part of our daily rhythms, our planning for the future, our understanding of who we are as a family. The only thing missing is the legal recognition of what's already true in our hearts." Judge Hawthorne called for a brief recess to review the proposed agreement one final time. During the wait, Iris sat quietly in the hallway with Miss Dorothy, who had come to provide moral support and witness what she hoped would be a positive resolution. "Are you nervous, Pequeña?" Miss Dorothy asked gently. "A little," Iris admitted, But not the bad kind of nervous, like when people are making decisions about you without asking what you want. This is the good kind of nervous. Like when you're waiting to open a present you think you're going to love. When court reconvened, Judge Hawthorne's expression had softened slightly from her usual judicial sternness. "I've reviewed the proposed guardianship agreement, and while it's unconventional, I believe it serves the child's best interests in a way that a traditional custody award might not." She paused, looking directly at Iris, who was sitting between Leandro and Eleanor in the front row. "Iris, do you understand that Mr. Leandro and Miss Maria would be your everyday family? The people who take care of you and make decisions about things like school and bedtime?" "Yes, ma'am." "And do you understand that Mrs. Eleanor and Mrs. Margaret would be your special family? People who love you and visit you and share holidays with you? Like having extra aunts," Iris said confidently. "Exactly like having extra aunts." "Is that something you would like?" "Yes, please." Judge Hawthorne smiled, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from her during the entire proceedings. "Then this court awards permanent guardianship of Iris Rose Patterson to Leandro Vasconcelos and Maria Gonzalez, with visitation and extended family rights, granted to Eleanor Patterson and Margaret Patterson Williams, as outlined in the submitted agreement." The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration. Eleanor was crying, but they were tears of relief rather than disappointment. Margaret was shaking Leandro's hand and talking rapidly about planning special trips for Iris. David Chen looked like he couldn't quite believe they'd successfully argued for such an unusual arrangement. But the most powerful moment came when Iris climbed onto Leandro's lap and whispered, "Can we go home now? I want to show Caio the drawing I made about my big family." That afternoon they returned to the mansion on Elm Street to find Caio waiting on the front porch, his wheelchair positioned so he could see down the driveway. Maria stood behind him, her hands clasped tightly as if in prayer, when Iris burst from the car and ran toward them, shouting, "I get to stay! I get to stay forever!" The reunion was everything a homecoming should be. "Did you really think we'd let anyone take you away from us?" Caio asked, as Iris threw herself into his arms. "I hoped not," she replied seriously, "but hoping and knowing are different things. Now I know." That evening, they gathered around the kitchen table for dinner. Not just the immediate family, but Eleanor and Margaret as well, beginning the process of learning how to be an extended family that chose each other rather than one connected only by genetics. Iris had insisted on setting the table herself, carefully placing name cards she'd made for each person. "This is like my drawing," she announced, surveying the full table with satisfaction. "The one where everyone is holding hands around the dinner table. I drew it before I met Mrs. Eleanor and Mrs. Margaret, but somehow I knew there would be more people." "Maybe," Eleanor suggested gently, "your grandmother Rose was helping you imagine what family could look like." "Maybe," Iris agreed. "Grandma Rose always said love was like seeds. You plant them wherever you find good soil, and beautiful things grow in places you never expected." As they shared their first meal as an officially recognized family unit, Leandro looked around the table and marveled at the journey that had brought them all together. A drowning boy, a homeless girl, 2 grieving sisters and a widowed father had somehow found a way to create something that was bigger and more beautiful than any of them could have imagined on their own. Outside, the Tennessee sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, and inside the Vasconcelos house, a 4-year-old girl who had learned too much about loss was finally learning what it meant to gain a family that would never let her go. 3 months into their new life as an officially blended family, the honeymoon period came to an abrupt end on a rainy Thursday afternoon when Iris had her first major meltdown since moving in permanently. The trigger seemed minor. Maria had rearranged the kitchen cabinets to accommodate new dishes Eleanor had brought as a housewarming gift, but Iris's reaction was anything but small. "You moved everything!" she screamed, standing in the middle of the kitchen with tears streaming down her face. "You changed it all without asking me, just like they always do." The raw pain in her voice stopped everyone in their tracks. Maria, who had been folding laundry nearby, immediately knelt down to Iris's eye level. "Pequeña, I'm sorry. I didn't think about asking you first." "Nobody ever asks," Iris sobbed. "They just change things and move things and take things away, and they say it's better but it's different, and I hate different." Leandro appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion, and recognized immediately that this wasn't about kitchen cabinets. This was about every time Iris had been moved without warning, every decision made about her life by adults who forgot to include her in the conversation. "You're right," he said, surprising everyone by sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor, so he was at Iris's height. "We should have asked you first. This is your kitchen too, and you should have a say in how it's organized." "But now it's all wrong," Iris wailed. "The cups are in a different place, and the crackers aren't where they used to be, and nothing feels safe anymore." Caio wheeled himself into the kitchen, having heard the distress from his room where he'd been doing homework. He surveyed the scene with the wisdom of someone who had experienced his own share of life-altering changes. "Want to help me reorganize it?" he offered quietly. "We could put everything exactly where you think it should go." "Can we really?" Iris asked between hiccups. "It's your home," Leandro said firmly. "Of course we can." What followed was 2 hours of methodical reorganization, with Iris directing the placement of every item while explaining her reasoning with 4-year-old logic that somehow made perfect sense. Cups needed to be where she could reach them without asking for help. Snacks should be visible so she knew they weren't running out. The cereal had to be on the middle shelf because that's where it belonged in her mental map of safety. "She needs control over her environment," Dr. Morris explained during their next family therapy session, which had become a monthly routine to help navigate the complexities of their unusual situation. Children who've experienced multiple placements often develop hypervigilance about changes to their surroundings. Even positive changes can trigger trauma responses. The kitchen incident became a turning point in how the family handled decisions. They instituted family meetings where everyone had a voice, including Iris, about changes that affected the household. It was during one of these meetings that Eleanor raised a concern that had been weighing on her mind. "I'd like to take Iris to visit Rose's grave," she said carefully. "She's never had the chance to say goodbye properly, and I think it might help her process her grief." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken concerns. Iris had been doing so well lately, sleeping through the night, laughing more freely, showing interest in starting pre-kindergarten in the fall. Would revisiting her grandmother's death disrupt that progress? "What do you think, Iris?" Leandro asked, following their new family protocol of including her in decisions that affected her. Iris considered the question with her characteristic seriousness. "I think Grandma Rose might be worried about me, because I never got to tell her goodbye. Maybe if I visit her sleeping place, I can tell her about my new family and she won't worry anymore. Would you like Mrs. Eleanor to take you? Or would you prefer that all of us go together?" "All of us," Iris said immediately. Grandma Rose should meet everyone. The following Saturday found their extended family gathered at Riverside Memorial Cemetery, standing around a modest headstone that read, "Rose Patterson, beloved grandmother and friend." Iris had insisted on bringing flowers, yellow roses because Grandma Rose liked yellow things, and a drawing she'd made showing her new family. "Hi, Grandma Rose," Iris said, settling cross-legged in front of the headstone with the easy acceptance of childhood. "I brought people to meet you. This is Mr. Leandro, who pulled me out of the water when I was drowning in sadness. This is Caio, who teaches me to draw birds that look like they're really flying. This is Maria, who makes pancakes shaped like flowers, just like you used to do." She continued with formal introductions for Eleanor and Margaret, explaining their roles in her life with the careful precision of a diplomat arranging a peace treaty. Then she placed the drawing against the headstone, weighing it down with small stones so it wouldn't blow away. "I'm okay now," she told the grave quietly. "I was scared for a while, because I didn't have anybody, but now I have lots of people, and they all promise they won't go away. I still miss you, but it doesn't hurt as much because I know you wanted me to find a good family." The adults stood in respectful silence, many of them struggling with their own emotions as they witnessed this 4-year-old's remarkable ability to process grief and find closure. When Iris finally stood and brushed dirt from her dress, she seemed lighter somehow, as if leaving something heavy behind at her grandmother's resting place. "Can we come back sometimes?" she asked Eleanor. "Whenever you want to," Eleanor promised, her voice thick with tears she was trying not to shed in front of Iris. The summer passed in a blur of swim lessons, art projects, and family adventures. Margaret had kept her promise about special trips, taking Iris to Nashville's Children's Museum and the zoo in Atlanta, always returning her home with tales of their adventures and small gifts that became treasured possessions. Eleanor visited weekly, sharing stories about Rose's childhood and teaching Iris to bake cookies from recipes that had been passed down through generations. But it was the quiet, everyday moments that truly cemented their family bonds. Caio teaching Iris to play chess, even though she was years away from understanding strategy. Maria braiding Iris's hair while singing Spanish lullabies. Leandro reading bedtime stories with different voices for each character, making Iris giggle with his dramatic interpretations. The first real test of their expanded family structure came in August, when Iris had a nightmare so intense that she woke up screaming and couldn't be consoled by Maria or Leandro. It was 2 a.m., and Caio had wheeled himself to her room to see what was wrong. "I dreamed that the judge lady changed her mind," Iris sobbed. "She said I had to go live with strangers again, and nobody could stop her." "Dreams can't change real life," Caio said firmly. "You belong here with us. The papers are signed and everything." "But what if something happens to Mr. Leandro like what happened to Grandma Rose? What if he goes to sleep forever and I have to go live somewhere else?" The question revealed the deep-seated fear that still lurked beneath Iris's increasing confidence, the terror of losing another family, of being abandoned again through circumstances beyond anyone's control. It was Maria who provided the answer, speaking from her own experience of loss and uncertainty. "Pequeña, listen to me carefully," she said, settling on the edge of Iris's bed. "When I came to this country, I left my own children behind with my mother because I thought I could make money and bring them here for a better life. But my mother got sick, and my children grew up without me. I know what it feels like to lose family." Iris looked up at her with wide, attentive eyes. "But here's what I learned," Maria continued. "Love doesn't disappear when people go away. It stays in your heart and makes you stronger. And when you find new family, like I found with you and Caio and Mr. Leandro, that love grows bigger, not smaller. Even if something happened to one of us, the love would still be there, and the rest of us would still be here to take care of you. Promise." "I promise." "And you know what? Mrs. Eleanor and Mrs. Margaret promise too. You have so many people who love you now that you'll never be alone again, no matter what happens." It was a promise they would all work to keep through the small challenges of daily life and the larger obstacles that would inevitably arise as Iris grew older and their family continued to evolve. But for now, in the quiet darkness of a Tennessee night, it was enough to chase away the nightmares and help a little girl fall back asleep, surrounded by the certainty that she was home to stay. By September, when Iris started pre-kindergarten at Riverside Elementary, she had become the kind of child who radiated confidence and joy. Her teacher, Mrs. Anderson, noted in her first progress report that Iris was remarkably mature for her age, with exceptional artistic abilities and strong social skills. What the teacher couldn't know was that this confidence had been built through months of careful nurturing by adults who understood that trust, once broken, had to be rebuilt one small promise at a time. The first sign of trouble came on a crisp October morning when Leandro received an unexpected phone call at his office. The voice on the other end was familiar but unwelcome. Richard Morrison, an investigative journalist from the Riverside Gazette, who had a reputation for digging up stories that made people uncomfortable. "Mr. Vasconcellos, I'm working on a piece about the unusual custody arrangement involving Iris Patterson," Morrison announced without preamble. "I'd like to get your comment on some allegations that have come to my attention." Leandro felt his stomach drop. "What kind of allegations?" "I've been contacted by someone claiming that your family's involvement with Iris wasn't as altruistic as it appeared in court. There are suggestions that you may have had prior knowledge of her situation before the supposed rescue at your pool." "That's completely false," Leandro said sharply. "I'd never seen that child before she saved my son's life." "Then you won't mind answering some questions about your connection to her grandmother, Rose Patterson, who apparently worked as a cleaning lady for several businesses in town, including some of your competitors?" The implication hit Leandro like a physical blow. Morrison was suggesting that he'd somehow orchestrated Iris's rescue for publicity purposes, or worse, that there had been some kind of business connection that motivated his involvement. "I don't know anything about Rose Patterson working for anyone," Leandro said firmly. "And I don't appreciate the insinuation that my family's care for an orphan child had ulterior motives. So you're willing to go on record denying any prior knowledge of or connection to the Patterson family?" "Absolutely." But even as Leandro hung up the phone, doubt began gnawing at him. Rose Patterson. The name was vaguely familiar, though he couldn't place where he might have heard it. Had she worked for one of his competitors? Had there been some business connection he'd forgotten about in the emotional aftermath of Iris's rescue? That evening, he shared Morrison's call with Maria and Caio, hoping one of them might remember something that would explain the journalist's suspicions. "Rose Patterson," Maria repeated thoughtfully. "The name sounds familiar, but I can't place it. Maybe she applied for work here at some point." "What if she did?" Caio asked pragmatically. "That wouldn't change anything about why we wanted to help Iris." But Leandro knew that perception often mattered more than reality, especially when children's welfare was involved. If Morrison published a story suggesting that Iris's placement with them had been motivated by anything other than genuine care, it could trigger a new investigation by Child Protective Services. The second shoe dropped 3 days later when Eleanor called in distress. "Leandro, I just got the strangest phone call from a journalist. He's asking questions about Rose's employment history and whether our family had any business connections to yours." "Richard Morrison?" "Yes. He seemed to know things about Rose that I don't even know. He mentioned that she'd worked as a subcontractor for various businesses, doing cleaning and maintenance work. He asked specifically about whether she'd ever worked for your furniture company." That night, Leandro went through his old employment records with growing unease. His company had used several cleaning services over the years, often hiring individual contractors for special projects or busy periods. The names began to blur together until he found what he was looking for, and what he'd been dreading. Patterson Cleaning Services. A small, family-operated business that had provided deep cleaning for the factory twice in 2018, about a year before Iris ended up on the streets. The invoices were signed by Rose Patterson. "Mierda," he whispered, using one of the few Spanish curse words he'd picked up from Maria over the years. The implications were staggering. Rose Patterson had worked for his company, however briefly. When Iris ended up homeless and gravitated toward his neighborhood, it might not have been the random chance everyone had assumed. Had Rose somehow directed her granddaughter toward the Vasconcellos family, knowing they might help her? The revelation cast everything in a different light. Morrison could now argue that Iris's rescue had been orchestrated, that the custody battle had been manipulated, that the whole heartwarming story of found family was actually a calculated deception. But more troubling was the question of what else Morrison might have discovered. If he'd uncovered Rose's employment history, what other connections might he have found? The answer came the following week in the form of Margaret's panicked phone call. "Leandro, we have a problem. Morrison found something about my company that could destroy everything." They met at Eleanor's house that evening. All the adults who had fought to create Iris's extended family now gathered in crisis mode, while the little girl played contentedly in the garden, unaware that her world was once again under threat. 3 years ago, Margaret began reluctantly, my development company was part of a consortium that purchased several properties in low-income neighborhoods for redevelopment. One of those properties was the trailer park where Rose and Iris lived. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "Rose lost her home because of your business?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not directly. The trailer park was already failing and the owner wanted to sell. We bought it along with several other parcels for a planned mixed-use development that never got off the ground. The residents were given 6 months' notice and relocation assistance." "But Rose couldn't afford to relocate," Leandro said, piecing together the timeline. "Apparently not. According to the records Morrison showed me, she and Iris moved from the trailer park to a small apartment, but Rose couldn't afford the higher rent on her fixed income. That's when her health problems started getting worse. So your business decision contributed to the circumstances that made Iris homeless," Eleanor said flatly. "Yes," Margaret admitted, her face pale with shame. "If Morrison publishes that connection, it's going to look like we all conspired to create Iris's situation and then swooped in to play saviors." "Did you know?" Leandro asked. "When you first showed up at the custody hearing, did you know about the trailer park?" "No," Margaret said quickly. "I had no idea. My company was involved in dozens of property acquisitions that year. I didn't remember the details of every single purchase, and I certainly didn't know that any of the displaced residents were related to me." They sat in uncomfortable silence, each processing how these revelations would affect their family. The beautiful story of choosing love over blood, of creating family through commitment rather than genetics, was about to be reframed as a cynical manipulation of a vulnerable child. "What does Morrison want?" Leandro finally asked. "Exclusive access," Eleanor replied grimly. "He wants to interview all of us, plus Iris. He's threatening to publish a story about the conspiracy to create a family if we don't cooperate." "We can't let him interview Iris," Leandro said immediately. "She's been through enough trauma. She doesn't need to be exposed to suggestions that her family isn't real or legitimate." "But if we refuse, he'll publish whatever version of the story serves his purposes," Margaret pointed out. "And that version might be even more damaging." It was Eleanor who voiced what they were all thinking. "Maybe we should have seen this coming. Maybe an arrangement like ours was too good to be true, too perfect to last." "Don't say that," Leandro said firmly. "What we've built together is real. The love Iris feels for all of us is real. The stability and happiness she's found with our family is real. Morrison can twist the facts all he wants, but he can't change the truth of what we've created together." But even as he spoke the words, Leandro wondered if the truth would be enough to protect their family from the storm that was coming. Outside, they could hear Iris's laughter as she played in Eleanor's garden, blissfully unaware that the adults she trusted to keep her safe were facing the biggest threat yet to the life they'd all worked so hard to build. By the time they finished their crisis meeting, one thing was clear. The next few weeks would test whether their chosen family was strong enough to survive not just external attack, but the weight of secrets and coincidences that made their love story look like something far less innocent to the outside world. The Riverside Gazette article appeared on a Tuesday morning with a headline that made Leandro's blood run cold: "The Making of a Family: How Business Connections and Hidden Agendas Created Riverside's Most Celebrated Custody Case." Morrison had done his homework, laying out a timeline that made their genuine love for Iris look like an elaborate scheme. The article detailed Rose Patterson's employment with Vasconcelos Custom Designs, Margaret's company's role in displacing the Patterson family from their trailer home, and what Morrison characterized as a series of convenient coincidences that resulted in significant positive publicity for all parties involved. He'd even included quotes from unnamed sources suggesting that the rescue at the pool had been staged. "Listen to this," Caio said bitterly, reading from the online version while Leandro paced the kitchen. The anonymous source claims that the timing was too perfect, the rescue too convenient. No homeless 4-year-old just happens to save the son of the exact businessman whose company employed her grandmother and whose business partner displaced her family. "People love conspiracy theories," Maria said, but her voice lacked conviction. "They can't believe that sometimes good things just happen." The immediate impact was devastating. Leandro's phone rang constantly with reporters seeking comment. Parents at Iris's school whispered and stared when they saw him at pickup, and his business began receiving cancellation calls from clients who didn't want to be associated with what some were calling the Vasconcelos scandal. But the most painful consequence was the effect on Iris herself. At barely 5 years old, she couldn't understand the complex accusations being made against her family, but she could sense the tension that had invaded their home and the worried looks the adults exchanged when they thought she wasn't watching. "Why is everyone sad?" she asked during dinner on Thursday, looking around the table at faces that had grown increasingly strained over the past week. "Some people are saying untrue things about our family," Eleanor explained carefully. "It's making us worried, but it doesn't change how much we love you. Are you going to send me away?" The question came out small and frightened, revealing the fear that still lived at the core of Iris's sense of security. "Never," Leandro said firmly. "No matter what anyone says or writes, you belong with us." But Iris's expression remained troubled. "In the group home, Marcus told me that newspapers can make judges change their minds about kids. He said judges don't like it when people write bad things about families." The sophisticated understanding she showed about media influence and judicial politics was heartbreaking in a child so young. It also highlighted the real danger they faced. If Morrison's allegations gained enough traction, they could indeed prompt a review of Iris's placement. That fear became reality on Friday when Sarah Martinez from Child Protective Services called to schedule a meeting. "We've received some concerns about the circumstances surrounding Iris's placement," she explained diplomatically. "We need to conduct a review to ensure that all proper procedures were followed." The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday, giving them a weekend to prepare for what could be the beginning of the end of their family as they knew it. But it was during this dark weekend that an unexpected ally emerged from the most unlikely source. Mrs. Anderson, Iris's pre-kindergarten teacher, called Leandro on Saturday evening with information that would change everything. "Mr. Vasconcelos, I hope you don't mind me calling at home, but I've been following the news coverage, and I think there's something you need to know about Rose Patterson." "What about her?" "She was my student-teacher supervisor 20 years ago when I was getting my teaching certificate. We stayed in touch over the years, especially after she started raising Iris. Rose used to bring Iris to the school sometimes when she came to visit me." Leandro's heart began racing. "What did she tell you about Iris?" "She was terrified about what would happen to the child if something happened to her. Rose had a weak heart, and she knew she might not live to see Iris grow up. She spent months researching families in Riverside, looking for people who might be able to care for Iris if the need arose." "She researched families?" "Specifically, she researched your family." After she cleaned your factory that one time, she asked around about you, your reputation, how you treated employees, what kind of father you were to Kaio. She even drove by your house several times, just observing the neighborhood. The revelation hit Leandro like a thunderbolt. She was planning for Iris to end up with us? Rose told me that if anything ever happened to her, she hoped Iris would somehow find her way to the furniture man with the kind eyes who treats his workers well. She said she'd taught Iris to be brave and resourceful, and she prayed that if the worst happened, Iris would make her way to the good people she'd identified. Do you have any proof of this? Any documentation? Better than that, Mrs. Anderson said. I have recordings. Rose was worried about her memory failing as her health declined, so she started recording video messages for Iris on my old camera. She wanted Iris to have something to remember her by, but she also used the recordings to document her wishes about Iris's care. She left the camera with me for safekeeping. Sunday was spent in frantic preparation. Mrs. Anderson delivered the camera with Rose's recordings, and what they revealed painted a completely different picture of the events that had brought Iris to their family. Far from being random coincidence, Rose had orchestrated everything she could to give her granddaughter the best possible chance at finding a loving home. In recording after recording, Rose spoke about her research into potential families, her hopes that Iris would remember the lessons about being brave and helping others, and her specific prayers that, if my little bird has to fly alone, she'll find her way to safe nest with the Vasconcelos family. Most remarkably, Rose had recorded a message specifically addressing the possibility that her prior connections to the family might be discovered and misunderstood. If anyone ever questions why Iris ended up with Mr. Leandro's family, they need to understand that I planned it this way, not because of business or money or any of those things people might think. I planned it because I loved my granddaughter enough to spend my last healthy months making sure she would be safe when I was gone. The final recording was dated just 2 weeks before Rose's death. In it, a visibly frail Rose spoke directly to the camera with urgent intensity. Iris, my sweet girl, if you're watching this, it means I've gone to sleep forever and you're with the family I chose for you. Mr. Leandro and his son Kaio are good people who understand what it means to lose someone you love. They'll teach you that families aren't just about blood, they're about people who choose to love each other every day, even when it's hard. She paused, collecting her strength, then continued. I know some people might say bad things about why you ended up with them, might suggest there were selfish reasons or hidden plans, but the only plan I had was to love you enough to find you the best possible future. Everything that happened after I was gone, you saving Kaio, them saving you, all of you becoming a real family, that wasn't my plan. That was love, working the way love is supposed to work, creating miracles out of broken pieces. When the video ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even Iris, who had watched some of the recordings with them, seemed to understand the magnitude of what her grandmother had done. Grandma Rose picked you for me, she said wonderingly. She knew I would need you before I knew I would need you. She did, Leandro agreed, his voice thick with emotion. She loved you so much that she made sure you'd never be truly alone, even after she was gone. Monday's meeting with Child Protective Services took on a completely different tone when they presented Rose's recordings, along with Mrs. Anderson's testimony about Rose's research and planning. Sarah Martinez watched the videos with growing amazement, occasionally pausing to make notes or ask clarifying questions. This certainly changes our understanding of the situation, she admitted when the presentation was over. Rose Patterson wasn't an uninformed grandmother making desperate choices. She was a thoughtful woman making careful plans for her granddaughter's future welfare. So there won't be any disruption to Iris's placement, Eleanor asked anxiously. On the contrary, this evidence suggests that Iris's current placement was exactly what her legal guardian intended before her death. Rose Patterson may not have been able to formalize these arrangements through proper legal channels, but her documented wishes carry significant weight in determining the child's best interests. That afternoon, Leandro called Richard Morrison with an offer the journalist couldn't refuse: exclusive access to Rose Patterson's recordings and the full story of a grandmother's love transcending death to protect her granddaughter. The follow-up article, published the next day, bore a very different headline: A Grandmother's Love, How Rose Patterson Orchestrated Her Granddaughter's Rescue from Beyond the Grave. The new narrative transformed public perception overnight. Instead of a suspicious conspiracy, the Vasconcellos family became the beneficiaries of a dying woman's extraordinary love and foresight. The criticism disappeared, replaced by admiration for Rose's planning and the family's willingness to honor her wishes by loving Iris unconditionally. But perhaps the most important transformation was in Iris herself. Learning that her grandmother had chosen her family specifically, that their love wasn't coincidence but the fulfillment of Rose's final wishes, gave her a sense of destiny and belonging that even court orders couldn't provide. "I'm not just lucky," she announced at dinner that night. "I'm exactly where Grandma Rose wanted me to be, with exactly the people she picked for me. That makes us even more special than a regular family." And looking around the table at the faces of people who had chosen to love each other against all odds, Leandro had to agree. They were indeed more special than a regular family, bound together not just by choice and commitment, but by the extraordinary love of a woman who had refused to let death prevent her from protecting the child she treasured above all else. 1 year after the revelation of Rose's recordings, the Vasconcellos' home had settled into rhythms that felt as natural as breathing. Iris, now 5.5, had grown taller and more confident, her artwork evolving from simple bird drawings to complex family portraits that captured not just faces, but emotions. The refrigerator door served as a rotating gallery of her latest creations, each piece telling the story of a child who finally understood what it meant to be unconditionally loved. On this particular Saturday morning in November, Iris stood in the kitchen wearing her favorite yellow dress, the one Eleanor had bought her for special occasions, carefully arranging flowers she'd picked from Maria's garden. Today marked exactly 2 years since she'd first climbed the fence and jumped into the pool to save Ko, and they'd decided to celebrate what they now called Family Day. "Are you sure you want to invite everyone?" Leandro asked, watching as Iris counted out place settings for what would be their largest gathering yet. "Everyone means everyone," Iris replied, with the certainty that had become her trademark. "Mrs. Dorothy from the group home, Mrs. Anderson from school, Dr. Morris, even Mr. Morrison, because he helped tell the truth about Grandma Rose's plan." The guest list had grown organically over the months, as Iris insisted on including every person who had played a role in their family's story. What had started as a simple anniversary dinner had become a celebration that would fill their house with people who had learned that love could transcend traditional boundaries. Ko, now 14 and significantly taller than when Iris first met him, wheeled himself into the kitchen with a wrapped package under his arm. "I finished your surprise," he announced, setting the box on the counter. "Can I open it now?" Iris asked, bouncing slightly with excitement. "Wait until everyone gets here." "But I'll give you a hint. It's something that tells our whole story." The first guests began arriving at 2 o'clock, and by 3:30 the house buzzed with conversations in English and Spanish, laughter from the garden, where some of the younger visitors played, and the comfortable chaos of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Miss Dorothy arrived with Marcus, now 18, and preparing to start college, with a scholarship funded jointly by Leandro's company and Margaret's foundation. The teenager who had once seemed destined for a life in the system had become a success story, and seeing him with his arm around Miss Dorothy's shoulders reminded everyone that good endings were possible even after difficult beginnings. "Look at this place," Marcus marveled, surveying the house filled with family photos and Iris's artwork. It's like something out of a magazine, but better because it actually feels like home. Dr. Morris brought her own family, her husband, and 2 young children who were immediately enchanted by Iris's confident storytelling about her very big family with lots of aunts and uncles who aren't really aunts and uncles, but are better than regular relatives. Even Richard Morrison attended, having become something of a family friend after his second article turned him from adversary to advocate. He spent most of the afternoon interviewing various family members for a follow-up piece he was writing about how their story had influenced other non-traditional adoption arrangements in the region. "You've started something of a movement," he told Eleanor, as they watched Iris demonstrate her latest art technique to a group of fascinated adults. "Family courts across Tennessee are citing your case when approving similar arrangements. You've proven that blood doesn't automatically equal best interests." As the afternoon wore on, stories were shared that illuminated how much everyone's lives had changed since that September day when a homeless 4-year-old had scaled a fence to save a drowning boy. Maria spoke about how caring for Iris had reminded her of the daughter she'd left behind in El Salvador, leading to a reconciliation and plans for a reunion the following year. Eldona and Margaret had grown closer than they'd been since childhood, their shared commitment to Iris healing decades-old rifts between them. But perhaps the most profound change was in Caio himself. The angry, isolated boy who had once refused to leave his room had become a confident teenager who spoke passionately about his plans to study art therapy in college, inspired by watching Iris use drawing to process her emotions. "She saved my life twice," he explained to Mrs. Anderson, who was hearing some of these details for the first time. "Once, literally, when she pulled me out of the pool. But the second time was more important. She saved me from drowning in self-pity and anger." As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the windows, Leandro called everyone together for the formal presentation of Caio's surprise. Iris sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by all the people who had become her chosen family as her brother handed her the wrapped package. Inside was a leather-bound book titled "The Story of Iris Rose, A Family Grown from Love." Caio had spent months creating an illustrated chronicle of their journey together, combining photographs, copies of Iris's drawings, excerpts from court documents, and his own artistic interpretations of key moments in their story. The first page showed a small figure climbing a tall fence, with the caption, "Sometimes heroes come in the smallest packages." Subsequent pages documented their first meeting, the custody battle, the revelation of Rose's plan, and their evolution into the extended family that now filled the room. "This is us," Iris breathed, turning pages slowly to savor each image. "This is really, truly us." The final page was blank except for a single line at the bottom. "Every family's story continues with each new day of choosing to love each other." "That page is for whatever comes next," Caio explained. "New adventures, new challenges, new reasons to celebrate. Our story isn't finished. It's just getting started." As guests began to leave, carrying leftovers and promises to gather again soon, Iris found herself alone with her core family, Leandro, Maria, and Caio, in the kitchen where so many important conversations had taken place over the past 2 years. "Are you happy, Pequeña?" Maria asked, settling into the chair that had become known as hers during countless family meetings and homework sessions. "I'm more than happy," Iris replied, climbing onto Leandro's lap with the easy familiarity of a child who had never doubted her place in his heart. "I'm grateful. Grandma Rose taught me that word. She said being grateful means understanding that good things don't just happen. They come from love and work and people choosing to care about each other." "What are you most grateful for?" Leandro asked, smoothing her hair as she settled against his shoulder. Iris considered the question with her characteristic seriousness. I'm grateful that when I was drowning in sadness, I found someone else who was drowning too, and we saved each other. I'm grateful that grown-ups can change their minds when they realize what's really important. I'm grateful that families can be bigger and more complicated and more wonderful than anyone expects them to be. She paused, looking around the kitchen where drawings covered the refrigerator, where Maria's flowers brightened the windowsill, where Caio's art supplies shared table space with homework and family schedules. But mostly, she continued, I'm grateful that Grandma Rose loved me enough to find you all before she went to sleep forever. She knew I would need a family who understood that love isn't about being perfect or having all the right papers or following all the regular rules. Love is about seeing someone who needs you and deciding that their happiness matters more than anything else in the whole world. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the Tennessee sky. And inside the Vasconcellos house, a family that had been forged through loss, tested by bureaucracy, and strengthened by truth, settled into the evening routines that had become their foundation. Homework needed to be finished, baths needed to be taken, bedtime stories needed to be read. But before the day ended completely, Iris made one final entry in the journal Eleanor had given her for recording her thoughts and dreams. In her careful 5-year-old handwriting, she wrote, "Today I celebrated my family and remembered that miracles aren't magic. They're what happens when people love each other enough to fight for what's right. Grandma Rose's love reached across heaven to make sure I found my way home. Tomorrow, I will love everyone back just as hard, because that's what families do." She closed the journal and placed it on her bedside table next to the photo of Rose that Eleanor had framed for her. In the picture, her grandmother was young and smiling, holding a small bird that had apparently fallen from its nest. The image perfectly captured what Rose had done for Iris, rescued a small, vulnerable creature and helped it learn to fly. As Leandro turned off the lights and the house settled into peaceful quiet, Iris drifted off to sleep, surrounded by the certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the people who had been chosen specifically to love her. Her dreams were filled with yellow roses, flying birds, and the sound of laughter echoing through a house that had become home not through accident or coincidence, but through the extraordinary power of love that refused to be limited by convention, law, or even death itself. The little girl who had once drawn pictures of caged birds now dreamed of endless skies where families of choice soared together, bound not by blood, but by the unbreakable bonds forged when people decide that loving each other is worth fighting for, no matter what obstacles the world places in their way. In the end, Rose Patterson's greatest gift to her granddaughter wasn't the family she'd chosen for her. It was the understanding that love, when it's real and true and brave enough, can overcome anything.